Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the history of a subway project in New York that has been long awaited, and that is the Second Avenue Subway. Although the Second Avenue elevator did not end service until the 1940s, plans to replace it with a subway line could date back to the 1920s. In the early 20th century, the New York City subway saw a hike in ridership. By 1920, 1.3 billion people used the subway annually. In 1919, the New York Public Service Commission launched a study on improving transit in the city. The plans called for transit routes under almost every north-south avenue in Manhattan, including a 6-track subway line under 2nd Avenue that would replace the 2nd and 3rd Avenue elevated lines. On September 15, 1929, the plan was approved by the Board of Transportation of New York City. The estimated cost at the time was $98.9 million. The initial plan was to have several spur lines merge into a 4-track trunk line in the Bronx. It will cross the Harlem River to 125th Street. From there, it will be a 6-track line down to 61st Street with a connection to the IND 6th Avenue line. From 61st Street to Chambers Street, there will be 4 tracks, and from Chambers Street to Pine Street, there will be 2 tracks. However, the Great Depression that hit caused increase in construction costs, and funding was not available for the 2nd Avenue subway. In 1930, a scaled-down version of the original plan was made. The portion from 125th Street to Houston Street was set to be completed by 1940, and a spur line along 34th Street was to be completed by 1948. In 1931, the plan was postponed. In 1932, the line was further scaled down with a branch in the Bronx cancelled, and the southern terminus moved to the Nassau Street Loop. By 1939, only a short length was completed and the project was relegated to proposed status. The line was cut to 2 tracks with branch to Cross Neck in the Bronx, a connection to the BMT Broadway line in Manhattan, and continuation onto the IND Fulton Street line via the Court Street station in Brooklyn. The cost of the project has risen to $249 million. In 1941, World War II halted the 2nd Avenue subway once again. Following the discontinuation of service on the 2nd Avenue elevator between 1940 and 1942, there were no more direct access to Manhattan's east side on the Astoria and Flushing lines in Queens. Meanwhile, the east side saw a huge population growth, making the 2nd Avenue subway to be more urgent than before. In 1944, the Board of Transportation put out a new proposal for 2nd Avenue service to branch off the B Division. The new proposed line was to be opened in 1951. However, this plan was once again revised. By 1947, a new plan was proposed by a city planner and former IRT engineer, Colonel Sidney H. Bingham. The plan involved more branch lines and track connections and was to be built in sections. The Board of Transportation ordered 10 new R11 subway cars built by Budd to be used on the 2nd Avenue subway. The new cars were delivered in 1949. I will make a dedicated video on the R11s, so stay tuned. In 1949, a new plan added connections to Queens due to complaints from Queens and Lower Manhattan residents. In 1951, a $559 million bond measure for its construction was approved by voters. However, due to price increase in construction materials and massive inflations, the bond was used in improving other parts of the system, such as purchase of new fleet of subway cars, lengthened platforms, and more. Only $112 million went towards the Second Avenue Subway. Construction was to start in either 1952 or 1957 and complete as early as 1958. Meanwhile, the Third Avenue Elevated was closed on May 13, 1955, leaving the Lexington Avenue line as the only transit option in the east side of Manhattan, leading to massive overcrowding issues. By 1957, the bond was used in other projects. In November 1967, the Christie Street connection opened with the new Grand Street station. This station was designed with the cross-platform transfer between the 2nd and 6th Avenue lines. That same year, voters approved a $2.5 billion transportation bond issue. $600 million will be provided for projects in New York City, including the 1968 Program for Action. The Program for Action proposed a 2nd Avenue line with two phases. First phase to be north of 34th Street, second phase to be south of it. The project was then given top priority. The new proposal spaced station further apart than other existing lines, which was controversial. Stations were then added at 72nd Street and 96th Street. A spur line branching off from 2nd Avenue station on the 6th Avenue line running along Houston Street, Avenue C, and 14th Street before connecting to the Canarsie line was also planned to serve the Lower East Side. In October of 1972, construction started on the tunnels between 99th Street and 105th Street. In March 1973, construction started between 110th Street and 120th Street. In October 1973, construction started in the Chinatown segment at Canal Street under the Manhattan Bridge. In July 1974, construction started between 2nd and 9th Streets. In total, construction on the 2nd Avenue line spanned over 27 blocks during the 1970s. But financial crisis soon hit the subway, the direst one yet. Massive outflows of residents to the suburbs has caused a huge decline in ridership since the 40s. The completion date for the 2nd Avenue Subway was set at 1980, but this date was pushed back to 2000. In October 1974, MTA Chairman David Unick pushed the completion date of the section north of 42nd Street back to 1983. The portion south of 42nd Street to be completed by 1988. In December of that year, New York City's Mayor Abraham Beame relocated the funding for the 2nd Avenue line to complete new lines in Queens and improve the existing system. In September 1975, the 2nd Avenue line was issued a stop work order. With no more funding, the 2nd Avenue Subway was once again halted. Only 3 sections of tunnel was completed besides the Christie Street connection. By 1978, State Comptroller Arthur Levitt stated that there were no plans to finish the line. Moving into the 80s, the plans for building the 2nd Avenue Subway was stagnated, though the IND 63rd Street line was finished by 1989. No connections were included to the 2nd Avenue line. Jenny Rashinoff, an advocate for subway riders since 1981, stated that it is much promised and never delivered. In the 1990s, efforts were made to revive the 2nd Avenue Subway project. The Lexington Avenue line became the only option for Upper East Side and East Harlem since the closure of the 3rd Avenue Elevated in 1955, and has become the most crowded subway in the country. The need of the 2nd Avenue line was once again becoming urgent. In 1991, $22 billion was allocated for the renewed planning and design of the 2nd Avenue Subway by Mario Cuomo, New York governor at the time, but this fund was removed 2 years later due to the MTA's budget cuts. In 1955, the MTA started the Manhattan East Side Alternative Study, seeking ways to solve the overcrowding issues on the Lexington Avenue line. Options included increasing capacity on the Lexington Avenue line, bus service with dedicated lanes, light rail, or ferry service on the east side. Another study called the Lower Manhattan Access Study was done in 1997 to determine the best transit option to the suburbs. The construction of the 2nd Avenue Subway between 63rd Street and Lower Manhattan was included as an alternative from the study. In 1999, proposals suggest for 2nd Avenue service to run from 63rd Street up to 125th Street and via the Broadway line to Lower Manhattan with local and express tracks switched on. 2nd Avenue express trains would run to Lower Manhattan via the Montague Street Tunnel, and local trains would run via the Manhattan Bridge and skip Lower Manhattan. A spur to Grand Central Terminal was considered but later dropped due to the infeasibility. In April 2000, the MTA board committed a full-length subway along 2nd Avenue from East Harlem to Lower Manhattan. In May 2000, $1.05 billion for constructing the 2nd Avenue subway was allocated in the 2000-2004 capital program. A year later, a contract was awarded to DMJM Harris, Arab joint venture, for the subway design. The new proposal suggests the line to run from 125th Street to 14th Street. From 14th Street, it will either travel under Christie Street, St. James Place, and Water Street to a terminal in Lower Manhattan, or link to the existing NASA Street loop tracks at Kemmerer Street to provide access to Lower Manhattan. The Water Street option was the one eventually chosen. In December 2001, a preliminary engineering for the full length of the 2nd Avenue subway was approved by the Federal Transit Administration. In April 2004, MTA's final environmental impact statement was approved. The latest proposal was a 2-track line from 125th Street and Lexington Avenue in Harlem to Hanover Square in the financial district, running along 2nd Avenue. The plan called for 2 services on the line, the T train and the Q train. Phase 1 would reroute the Q train along BMT 63rd Street line and 2nd Avenue line to 96th Street. Phase 2 would extend the Q train to 125th Street and Lexington Avenue. Phase 3 would introduce the T train running from 125th Street to Houston Street. Phase 4 would extend the T train to Hanover Square in Lower Manhattan. Phase 1 would be 1.8 miles long. Estimated cost was $4.45 billion. In 2007, a contract was awarded for the tunnel construction. A ceremonial groundbreaking took place on April 12, 2007 at the 99th Street tunnel segment built in the 1970s. Actual construction started on April 23, 2007. It was expected to finish by the end of 2013. The contracts for the stations and tunnels of Phase 1 were awarded in the following years. The cost increase has caused some of the designs. 72nd Street was cut from a 3-track, 2-platform design to a 2-track, single-platform design. The completion date was also pushed back to 2014. The date was pushed back again to 2015 in 2008 and to 2016 in 2009. Deep bore tunneling was used instead of cut and cover method to avoid the disruption to road traffic, pedestrians, utilities, and local businesses. In 2014, the whole line had an estimated completion time of 2029, serving 560,000 passengers daily. However, as of December 2016, only Phase 1 and Phase 2 were to be finished before 2029. In October 2016, test trains started running. Out-of-service Q trains would continue on to 2nd Avenue line to 96th Street. The ceremonial first train with prominent officials ran on December 31st, 2016. Phase 1 of the 2nd Avenue line was finally opened to the public at noon the next day. New stations opened at 72nd Street, 82nd Street, and 96th Street on 2nd Avenue. Soon after the opening of the new line, ridership dropped at 68th Street, 77th Street, 86th Street, and 96th Street on the Lexington Avenue line. In November 2017, due to increased demands, Q trains were increased by one trip during each rush hour, and one northbound R train was rerouted to 96th Street and 2nd Avenue. And that is the story of the 2nd Avenue Subway, from when it was first proposed to the opening of its first phase. If you want to learn more about the progress of the future phases of the 2nd Avenue Subway and the vision of the 2nd Avenue Subway by me, please stay tuned for part 2 of this video. Thanks for watching.